Hello there, this is Christy Liz from Dostoevsky in Space, and today I'm here with a battle video for you between two of the most highly lauded military leaders of all time, George Washington and Kaladin Stormblessed. You cannot argue with these choices, although if you want to, you can in the comments. This was actually inspired by my friend Victoria talking to me on my Instagram stories. I've been vlogging my daily thoughts on books that I'm reading on Instagram, and she was like,
all the stuff that you're talking about with Washington.
And I'm reading the Washington bio by Ron now.
It kind of reminds me of Kaladin.
And I thought that was a really good point, so here we are. This is also a Jonesing for Jonas video, which is being put on by, I believe, Jack from the Rambling Reconnoiteur and Noah from Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse. I believe those are the only two involved. I'll put their links down below in the comments, as well as Victoria's. And also, I'm reading the Washington bio for a read-along with Ramsey from Rajathon, so he's also down in the comments. Now let's get into this battle comparison video. I have a few categories here, but first, let me just give you a little bit of backstory on these characters, and I'm gonna just give you some spoiler warnings here for book 1 of the Stormlight Archives. Kaladin Stormblessed is one of the main characters in The Way of Kings. If you still want to go read that book, go read it and then come back and watch this. You can read it quickly and come back and watch it. Please do. It's an easy book to binge, in my opinion, because it's fabulous. You may have noticed the Stormalong 2020 live streams that were here on my channel. Yeah, those will also be linked down below because we read all of the Stormlight Archives books. Anyway, moving on. Kaladin starts that book as a soldier, and then he's made into a slave, and he has to spend like most of the rest of the book climbing himself back out of that and getting back into a position of some military power. And it's just fabulous to watch him. He's like one of my favorite fantasy characters ever. George Washington was the first president of the United States, but before that, he was in charge of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, which means he was fighting to make America an independent nation from Britain. That's the nation who is the colonizing nation of America. So like, he's a pretty important guy. Some people would argue that he's not like the best general, but that is where he made his name, and then he became the first president of the United States. So he must not have been too bad. Let the comparisons begin. Our first category is divine protection. Now, you could argue that Kaladin isn't actually under divine protection because Syl, who is his little fairy friend, is not a god. Some people treat her as a god, but she's more like an idea of a fragment of a god, one of a million little gazillion pieces of a god. But Kaladin is just so ridiculously lucky, and that's why we call him Stormblessed. I'm just gonna say it's divine protection because nobody survives that much unless they're Kaladin Stormblessed. He's like the most Stormblessed of anybody on Roshar. And Washington, you could also argue with me about this if you want. Again, there's a comment section. But Washington certainly believed that he was under divine protection, and the writer of this biography certainly puts it out there a couple of times. I definitely believe that he was under divine protection because there were so many times when he was out on the battlefield and someone shot through his shirt or shot his horse or shot his hat. Like, he was riding a white stallion, guys, and he didn't protect himself. He rode out into danger all the time. He definitely had no qualms about that, and he was always protected. He always survived. People were cannonballed right next to him, and he would just go on giving his speech or whatever. I mean, the dude's got poise, but that's not what the points for here. The points are for divine protection. I'm giving it to both. Okay, attitude is our next section, and you probably know what's coming here if you've read any of the Stormlight Archives. Kaladin has a pretty bad attitude, and that's because he has depression, and it's a big struggle for him. He's just sad all the time. He's not happy about being Stormblessed because that means everybody around him is dying, but like, he's complaining about surviving all of these things, and I just feel like that's not a good attitude. I understand. I love the guy. I am his biggest defender, but he doesn't have a good attitude sometimes. Washington, on the other hand, really passionate guy, but he keeps it under wraps, and he has the poise of a general, and he doesn't let his feelings get the best of him most of the time. It's not like it dominates him the way Kaladin does. Everybody jokes about Kaladin being scowly. Everybody joked about Washington being a cold fish because he had it under control, guys. He doesn't do it most of the time because he's under this iron self-control, which he developed from a young age. So, point for Washington on that one. Sorry, Cal. Magical powers. Only one of them legitimately earns magical powers, so point to Kaladin. And before you argue that it's Syl giving him the magical powers, who attracted Syl in the first place? It was Kaladin. Syl loves Kaladin because of his heart. He's a noble guy. They're his. caring about the troops. Both of these men had very, almost mystical connections with their troops. And Kaladin actually does have a mystical connection with his troops. Now, Washington, at times, he had kind of a mystical connection. He kind of came down off of his high horse, haha pun, even though he really did believe that he was a class above and that he was superior. He also really cared about his troops, and it upset him to see them suffer and to see the war profiteering going on because it was making his troops suffer even more. And he just really loved them, particularly towards the end. He had a harder time in the beginning. So Washington, I think, just had this harder. And hear me out. Kaladin got real lucky with some of the guys that ended up in his original Bridge 4. And also, he didn't have that hard of a time, convincing people. Because, again, he had magical powers. And also, it's a fantasy book. So, I am not putting it down for that. I love fantasy. But in real life, it's really hard to command the respect of your troops and to love them when they are cowards, when they won't fight for you, when they don't know how to wield their weapons, when they're just farmers coming out of the field and trying to fight and running away instead of fighting, when they're resisting your training, when they're actually rebelling up against you. It's hard to love a motley crew, especially when you're losing. But Washington actually did. He actually did learn to love his men, and that is just so hard. So while I'm giving each one of these guys a point, because their men obviously loved them, and they obviously loved their men and treated them well, I'm giving an extra point to Washington, because he just had it harder in this regard. He just did. On the other hand,
overcoming hardship.
Both of these men were born into a certain amount of privilege. Kaladin quickly lost that privilege through no fault of his own, and climbed his way back up. Now, Washington, born at the top of the food chain, never left it. He was born with the privilege. Unfortunately for Kaladin, that got taken away from him. He had a harder go of it because of that. So point to Kaladin, because he still became Kaladin Stormblessed. He still made a name for himself. If he'd had all the power that Washington had, he would have been president of Roshar. Slavery is our next category. Yeah, Kaladin was a slave, and he had a lot of empathy for the slaves who are fighting around him on the bridge crews. I've mentioned bridge crews, but I haven't actually explained what they are. Essentially, they are bridges that the lowest of the low men who are literally just bought for this purpose will run out ahead of the army carrying a bridge, set it across a chasm that's in the ground so the army can cross the chasm and fight the army on the other side, which means they're basically arrow fodder. That is their purpose. Kaladin and his fellow slaves are put to that service because nobody else wants to do it and nobody else knows what to do with them. So he knows what it's like to be a slave, and he cares a lot about his men. Essentially, he spends the whole first book fighting to get his men out of slavery, which is goals, man. Washington, on the other hand, treated slaves like an economic commodity. He didn't really care for most of them as people. He treated them well because he wanted them to work hard for him. There were plenty of abolitionists around him, and he had this manservant named Billy Lee, and they were super tight, and Washington should have known that Billy Lee was a person just like himself, and he should have set his slaves free no matter what that did to his estate back home. That would have been the right thing to do, and he didn't do it. So I'm actually taking a point away from Washington on this because he should know better. He actually had a chance to free a whole bunch of slaves in the war, but he was like, no, I think that would make the rest of the slaves in the South mad. You think? So yeah, point to Cal, minus point for Washington. Command power. Gotta give that one to Washington. Sorry, Cal. Washington was actually the executive of the whole nation of America. So that was a pretty high position. Can't argue with president. Point for Washington. Life. Gonna have to go with Cal on this one because at the end of book 1, he's alive. And that is quite a feat if you read that book. I can't believe he survived it, to be honest with you. So, it's better to be alive than not. Epic fails. Both of these men had some epic fails, and that's because they were both leaders who were very good at what they do, but, it takes practice to get good at what you do. You're not just, immediately good at it. So, Cal fails for one whole book. I'm not going to tell you which book because spoilers, but if you have talked to me at all about the Stormlight Archives, you probably know what I'm talking about. Washington. There's the Fort Necessity. That was his first major fail. It was his first command, I think, or at least his first battle he was in command of. Something like that. Regardless, major fail. Battle of Germantown. Yeah, That one was really bad. And also, he lost New York to the British. And that's as far as I've gotten so far in the biography. I'm sure there's more. Those were all pretty epic fails, though I'm giving points to both. Epic saves. Let's get back to Washington for a minute. When he lost the city of New York, he also saved all the lives of his men by retreating to Manhattan through the fog, across an icy river, right under the noses of the British. It's pretty impressive. He saved a lot of lives that night, and it kind of redeems the fact that he lost New York, in my opinion. Kaladin, on the other hand, literally saves an entire army with a spear, a ferry, and a group of convicts. And not only did he just save an army, he actually saved a group of people who had mistreated him for like several months very badly. They were like at the top of the food chain and he was at the bottom. He's a dark eyes, which in his society means he's never going to be as cool as the light eyes. And he went out and saved the light eyes. Points to both, but yeah, my heart is with Kaladin. Kaladin's just awesome. And our final category, which you may have seen coming, is romance. Kaladin loses a lot. He just doesn't ever win with women, which is something I don't really understand, but you know, it is what it is. He actually loses so much with women. I'm gonna give him a minus point on this one. He's just not really good at the romance thing. Now, Washington, he did lose his first love in a sense, but he found a wonderful woman that he completely loved, had a very happy marriage with, and you know what? She let him be friends with his old flame and had no problems with it. They still had a really happy marriage. That's major winning for Washington. I'm gonna give him 2 points because he got both the ladies in a sense. But, you know, this wouldn't be quite complete if I didn't say that I would completely choose Kaladin if I lived in Roshar. You know, he wouldn't have to be alone if I was in Roshar. So, extra bonus points to Kaladin. Y'all might think I'm a little bit biased towards Kaladin because it's true. But you know what? This is my video and I say Kaladin wins. 9-8. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Who's the real winner here? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you really enjoyed it. Definitely hit that like in the corner. That really helps me out. And subscribe to this channel if you would like to see more from me. And make sure to hit that bell notifications icon and make sure that your notifications are turned on in your YouTube app so you can be notified anytime that I make a new video. If you want to help me out but you don't have anything to say, leave me a sword. Thanks so much, guys. Take care and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.